So I decided to build my project for days like today, where it's snowing, because we have a garage, but the problem with using it is in situations like this, where people block you in, so then nobody wants to use the garage. So we needed a way to be able to indicate whether or not somebody was in the garage that was clear, so that people knew whether or not they could park in the driveway. Because of course on snowy days like today, you would love to have your car in the garage instead of, out getting snowed on. So the solution that I came up with was putting a sensor in the garage that would be able to sense if there was a car in there or not, and send that information to an exterior light on our house like that one. That way when you pull up to the house, you can see what color the light was and then determine whether or not you could A, park in the garage, which is ideal because then you don't get snowed on, or B, park, not to park in the driveway because somebody's already in there and you don't want to have to move your car because you block them in and it's just a hassle. So now I'm going to show you how I did it. Step one of the project was to actually get the Raspberry Pi and wire it up to the sensor that I was going to use to detect whether or not there was a car in the garage. So I got a Raspberry Pi and I assembled it, and then I wired it here to an ultrasonic sensor. So that's what that guy looks like. It sends a sound pulse and then it comes back, and once it bounces off of the object it's measuring, and it can determine how far away an object is using a little bit of logic. So here is how it's wired, and I just did this using a wiring diagram, and I learned where VCC, trig, echo, and ground need to be wired onto the Raspberry Pi. These resistors here, the little blue horizontal things, were used to make sure that the sensor was compatible with the Raspberry Pi. Step two of this project was to write the Python script that would make the ultrasonic sensor work the way that we want it to. So after some initial setup to get the Raspberry Pi connected with the ultrasonic sensor, we put in the logic that the ultrasonic sensor would use to determine the distance. You record the time that you send out the first pulse, and when that pulse gets back, you record that time again. The pulse duration is really simply determined by pulse end time minus the pulse start time. The distance is computed by multiplying the pulse duration by the speed of ultrasonic sound, and then you divide that by 2 because you only want the distance there, not the distance of there and back. After that, you print that distance out to the user so that they can determine how far that object was. So I'll show you that logic in action now. So I'll run the script, and you see that it's waiting for the sensor to settle, and then the distance it records is 17, and it's always right around 17. So that means the distance between the wall and the sensor is 17 centimeters. Once we've determined the distance between the wall and the sensor, we can come back into our code and write some more logic. So if the distance is ever less than 17, then that means that there's an object in the way of the wall and the sensor, and we're going to want to turn the light to red. And if the light is going to turn red, then that means a car's parked in the garage, change the light to red. If red light doesn't turn to 1 or true, then that means the garage is still empty and we'll keep the light green. Then what we'll do is we'll sleep for 1 second, and then we'll run it again. And this loop will continue infinitely when it's set to run. That way it's always checking, and we only stop it when we want it to no longer be checking. So now we can see the script in action here. So if we go ahead and run this, we see that it's waiting for the sensor to settle, and it records a distance, and it's saying keep the light green. Keep the light green because it's all over 17. That means there's nothing in between the sensor and the wall. If we use this bottle of aloe vera and we put it between the sensor and the wall, when we come back here, we'll see that it measured the new distance, and it's saying change the light to red. There's something in the way. As soon as we remove that again, it'll recalibrate and say keep the light green because there's no longer something in the way. In the ultimate case, it'll mean that there's no longer a car in the garage, so put the light to green so that people know that they can park in there. Obviously, if there's something in the way, we'll want to change that light to red so that people know there's a car in the garage, don't park in the driveway. So now the most challenging part, and the part that took me the longest, came into play, which is how do we actually change the color of that light using a Python script? So what I did is I got some of the Philips Hue series and a bridge as well. So you connect the bridge, which has its own IP address, to your router so that it's connected to the Wi-Fi. And then I put in my light bulb here, which is the one that we're going to change its color. So now it's time to go back to the script. First, I had to connect to the Philips API and figure out a few things. My username and what is the ID for the light that I'm trying to change. After I knew that, I imported the Hue module into my Python script. So here I imported it, and then I configured my bridge using its IP address. After that, we'll go back down to the logic where the lights change colors. So I figured out that if I wanted to change this to red, the set light, and for light ID 1, I needed to change the color, and this is a code for a red that I liked. If it was green, I needed to set the color of the light for light ID 1 with this green color that I liked. So when I had that logic configured and in my script, it was time to connect all the pieces. So we'll go back to our sensor here that's against the wall, and we'll put something in front of it, and you'll see that the light behind me changed to red. If I remove it, the light changes back to green. I put it back, and we're back to red. So once I had that down and it was looking good, it was time to move it out to the garage and put this light bulb outside where you could see it from the driveway. So now we have the final product, which is a LED smart light that is green. In the video it looks white, but in real life it's really green. And then when a car wants to pull into the garage here, there's the Raspberry Pi hooked up to the ultrasonic sensor that will measure the distance between the wall and determine if there's a car there or not. When there is a car, this light will turn red to let anybody who is coming to park here know not to park in the driveway because there's a car in the garage. So we'll have a car pull in and we'll see how it works. So there goes a car into the driveway, and then the light turns red. And then we'll have the car pull back out again. And once the car is clear of the garage, then we'll be able to see that light turn back to green. And then people know that the garage is now open and you can park in there. All in all, I was really happy how the project turned out. It worked perfectly, and it did what I wanted it to do. And more importantly than that, though, I learned a ton. I learned about wiring. I learned about why we use resistors. I learned Python, which I had not known. I practiced hitting an API, which I've done very little of. And I really enjoyed thinking through the logic of how everything needed to be. So I was super happy with the results, and I learned a lot of different things.